Okay, and so if you right-click on the little speaker in the bottom right corner of your screen, you can open volume mixer and just mute it. Can the people in remote students, can you guys hear me okay? All right, so we are going to use a, can you turn that sound up? So in Windows itself, the bottom right-hand side of your screen, there's a little speaker. Just click on that, and you can turn the volume down. So an array list is very similar to an array. One person still has their volume up. Where's it coming from? Still yours? Got it? Awesome. Perfect. Thank you. So an array list is very much like an array, but instead of actually holding the objects, oh, I can't draw on the board. This is awesome. Instead of actually holding the things themselves, like an array of integers actually holds the integers, an array list holds a reference to an object. So if you remember, a reference is like an arrow that points to an object. So like when we had strings, you didn't want to say, is string A equals to string B? Because that is saying, are the two arrows pointing to the same place? That's not saying, is the contents of that string the same? We had to use dot equals for strings. So an array list is similar in the sense that it holds arrows pointing to objects. The nice thing about array lists is that they are much more, you can manipulate them much more easily than regular arrays. So for like most things that we use, arrays are fine. But as you'll see, we can do some things with array lists that we cannot do with arrays. So today we're just going to go through and learn how to create array lists and how to go through them and how to add things on the end. So all right, so this is basically what we used for arrays up until now. It's a single block of memory, right? Because we know exactly how much space it's going to take in advance. We have to create exactly that much space in memory and stick the items in there. The biggest problem is that we can't change the size of an array, right? Once we've said it holds 10 integers, we can't then add another integer onto the end or remove items from the middle. We have to create a whole new array of the size we want and then copy everything into it, which is a pain in the butt. Is that correct? Could be phone away. And it's especially a problem if you don't know in advance how many things you have, right? So if you have like an array of players in a game, What if somebody joins? What if somebody drops? What if lots of people join and drop all throughout your game, right? You don't want to have to be constantly creating new arrays and deleting old arrays over and over and over again. You want to just be able to add people on the fly. So they use the example shopping list, which is the same thing, right? You don't want to have to deal with creating new arrays every time. So there's a few different scenarios where you'd want to use it. If you don't know how many things you need before you create the array, or if you know that you're going to be changing things on the fly fairly frequently, right? If you're only going to change it once in a blue moon, it doesn't matter. But if you're going to be constantly adding and removing things, then you want to use an array list. Oh yeah, okay. And one other thing, I hope they go over this. Oops. God, I wish I could write on the stupid board. Here, I'm gonna do this. Let's see it. Looks pretty good. So I have a little bit higher. Whoa, that's too high. Ah. There we go. That looks good. Okay. So no longer on this schedule. All right. So with arrays, what we used to have was a fixed amount. Amount 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we used it mostly for ints, strings, Boolean, things like that. We haven't used it for a lot of data types. What we're going, so this is an array. And now we're going to use an array list. This is changeable, or in programming language speak, it's called mutable. And you cannot have primitive types. No primitives. Oh, you can't see that on the screen. So int, double, Boolean, cannot have these in an array list. Okay, has to be objects. So how do we do this? We have what are called wrapper classes for integers and doubles and booleans. So we have new classes called integer, double, and Boolean. And what you'll notice is they have capital letters. And the nice thing about these is that Java is smart enough to say, if I say int, oops, x equals 5, and then I say integer y equals x, right? It won't complain about that. So Java is smart enough to say, oh, just stick the value 5 in this integer. It's not going to complain. You don't have to say, you don't have to cast it or do anything like that. So the two biggest differences between arrays and array lists are that you can change the size and that they all have to be objects. And you will get questions about that, yes, on the exam.
Do they all have to be the same object?
Yes, they all have to be the same object. Good question. Just like an array. Okay. So they also make the point that sometimes on the exam they use a shortcut name called list. That just means array list. Don't worry about the word interface. That is no longer on the exam. But if you ever see the word list, well, all it means is array list. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you see the word list, it means array list. I'm not going to worry about that for now. So just know that in all of our code that uses array lists, we have to import it because it's not included in the base Java implementation. It's a library. So if you want to use other libraries, so if we want to, remember when we used random numbers, we had to import that. So array list is just like that. We have to import it because it's not included by default. So at the top, you'll see at the top of all of our programs for this unit, it'll say import java.util.ArrayList. I don't care about that. So this is a little bit awkward to type, but this is how you create a new array list. So just like Peter asked, do all the elements have to be the same in an array list? Yes, they do. There are exceptions I just thought of, but let's just say yes, they do. We'll get into more complicated examples later. But when you're creating an, I can't walk over there. When you're creating a new array list, you have to tell it what kind you're creating. Yes?
On the ABLE exam, we have to use ArrayLists. We have to make sure we have that import statement, or is that like?
I can check on that if you need to write that. I think usually they will write it for you as part of that code, but I will double check. So check. Usually they don't care about stuff like that. They care more about like, does your algorithm work? So, but I will double check and get back to you. So the way that you tell it what kind of thing you want to store in your array list is with these angle brackets. So you're declaring the array shopping list here as an array list of strings. So you've declared your variable, and then you said, make me a new one. You'll notice that you didn't have to tell it what size it is. When we created arrays, right? You had to tell it right? You had to tell it either what was in it, so it knows what size it is, or they don't have an example here. Yeah. Here you go. Array size, right? So you have to either tell it what's in it or tell it how big to make it. With an array list, you don't need to do that because it is changeable. So to Peter's question, you can make an array list of generic objects and just stick other kinds of objects in there, but it's generally frowned upon. It's bad programming. Because if you tell it exactly what type of thing is going to be in it, a string, a double, an integer, a person, whatever kind of object, then Java can help you debug if you do something wrong. It'll give you a better error. If you just say it's an array of objects, or if you don't tell it what type it is, it defaults to just this generic object, then it hides all these bugs from you that will be really, really hard to figure out. So bottom line is use this declaration to tell it, in this class, there is no reason not to do this. It will make your life easier, and just assume that you can always use a specific type of array list. Let me put it that way. Yes, Java lets you do other things. No, we will never have to do it apart any other way than this one. So in the Google Meet, give me a plus minus squiggly, and in class, just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, wiggly thumb. How do we feel about array lists so far? So far, so good. Excellent. So just like every other object we have ever created, when you declare a bit, what I really want is this camera. No. So when you declare on this line right here, the name list, without telling it what it is just like declaring any other object. All you have at that point is an empty variable. Right? You've told it what kind of thing it is, but you haven't put anything there yet. On the last line there, you actually created a new array list and assigned it to that variable. So just like if you said car, my car, right? You would be declaring a variable my car, and you know it's of type car, but you haven't put anything in it yet. You have to say car, my car equals a new car or something like that. So same with array list, you have to actually say new array list. And like I said before, you cannot use the primitive types int and double. You have to use the wrapper classes because those are objects. And I don't know if you need to know this specific vocabulary, but doing something like this is called boxing. And doing something like this is called unboxing. Because if you think about it, all you're doing is putting that integer, the primitive type, into an object box. So unboxing means taking it out of the object. Boxing means putting it in. I don't know if you need to know that vocabulary on the exam, but that's just what it's called. So if I ever say boxing, just think of it as putting a primitive, something primitive into an object box to make it so that we can use it in an array list. So just like an array has a length, I don't know why they called it something different, because it's Java and Java hates you. They created a size method for array lists. So I'm thinking again, like on the AP exam, if you write length instead of size, I think they give you the point anyway. But obviously, if you try and compile and run your code, it won't work. If you use length on an array list, you need to use size instead. Yes, this is something that you definitely should pay attention to. If you do not, so when you declare your array list variable, if you don't create a new array list, if you don't say that second half of that first line there, that new array list over here, then name list would just point to null, right? Just like down here, list 2 equals null. If you don't create a new array list and then you try to take the length of it, you'll get a null pointer exception, because you're trying to get the size of something that is null. So you have to be always make sure that your variable has something inside of it. If you try to append items to it, if you try to delete items from it, if you try to get the length of it, you'll get a null pointer exception. And your program will die. We don't need to know about that. This we definitely want to use. So this is the big difference between arrays and array lists. Right? You can actually add things to array lists and remove things. As long as it has the same type, right? You can just use add. All right, so here's the summary. Basically, remember that it is resizable and it holds objects, not primitives. And I'll check on that util thing. But those are the two biggest things, two biggest takeaways. So I'm going to have you start working on 7.1.